Let's take a look at what we have under the brush tip shape. Right now we have our adorable snail, and if we can have that in any color we want. It's snail time, yay! All right, so under brush tip shape, we have this little window that has the brush tip shapes, and as I said, depending on the version of Photoshop, it will somewhat either logically or randomly place the captured brush tips that are in here. Again, we'll be talking about what the bristle brushes, the erodible brushes, and the airbrushes do in a little bit, but for now let's concentrate on the capture brushes. So with the capture brush, the brush tip shape has the following controls. Now if we were to select something else, and again we'll cover this later, like the bristle brush, we get different controls altogether. In this event we have bristle qualities, which makes sense since it's a bristle brush. Erodible has various erodible qualities, and the airbrush will have various airbrush qualities. Whereas if we get the snail, which I have now immediately lost track of because Photoshop placed it somewhere in the middle, and I don't think I'm going to spot it again since I scrolled away from it. Apparently we do have a rubber duck in here, which is interesting and not at all what I was expecting. But let's take a quick look at that. Yep, that is a rubber duck. We want our snail. Let's go ahead and grab that back. Here's our snail. Great. All right, so under the capture brush, we have the size, which makes sense. Boop, voila. Shrink it down. Boop. And remember, when you create a new brush, by either pressing the new brush, create new brush icon here, or by going to the flyout and going to new brush preset, which will load into brushes, we can store the size if we want, which will capture brush size and preset. I don't like doing that. I wouldn't recommend it. It makes your life a lot harder. Now, notice that in our drop down, we have size as well. We do not have hardness. And again, the reason for that is hardness applies to the round and square brushes while on the brush tool because it's partially in control of the anti-aliasing. We can also restore to original size if we've captured that and get that snail going. And you'll have that available here as well. Press the restore to original size to go back to whatever size it was originally captured at. All right. Let's get a little bigger so we can see it. That should do it. Maybe a little more. Maybe more. It just doesn't want to quite go up to the full. Oops. Had the bracket key in that window. All right, that's a good size. So the it would help if I didn't accidentally delete it. There we go. Okay, so this is a good size to demonstrate what the flip X and flip Y does. Here's just the snail. If we flip X, you'll see that the snail points in the opposite direction as though all of the pixels were flipped on, going on the x-axis. Now this is odd. In most software, the flip Y would be a reference to that. This is a reference to the standard graph where you have a Y and an X coordinate, Y, X. So Photoshop is saying, oh, we'll just make X minus X and negative X equal positive X and positive X equal negative X. Voila, it's flipped. Fine. In most software, they'd say, well, that's just flipping along the y-axis, so it would be a flip Y. So keep in mind that Photoshop does it a little differently than other software. Again, standard. Let me get this in. Standard without any flipping. Flip X, it's flipped the other direction. We also have flip Y, which will make it upside down. And you can have flip X and Y, which will flip it the other way altogether. Now, when you've done this, it can be useful if you did a capture brush and you realize that for some reason there was some rotation going on and you just want to change it. But if there's just a slight rotation, you also have the angle. Now you can put in an angle that you want, or as with most Photoshop options, if you mouse over the text, you can drag it left and right to move it by some percentage, and generally shift dragging will jump it by a much larger percentage. So let's go ahead and go in. You can see that we now have an angled brush. And you can have an even further angled brush if you wanted. That's great. There's also something called roundness. Now, in the event of roundness, it's a sort of squashiness that's occurring on the brush. Notice now that I've got a squashed little flat snail here going on. So let's crank that back up. Now if you were to do a flip X, and change the roundness, it would change it. And flip X, it would also change it. And you could have different angles. Notice that the angle is applied after the flipping. That's about where that is. So roundness is very useful if you're trying to make a chisel tipped brush. For example, we'll just make a chiseled tip snail for a moment. I'll just put it at an angle. I'll make it thin and I'll decrease the spacing. And now we have almost a calligraphy brush. Mix this in so that the rotation follows the brush's motion, which we know is under shape dynamics, angle jitter, direction. And that's kind of interesting. I don't really like how it's rotating. That would be good for, I guess, a flower if you wanted to make a daisy or something. Doop. Voila. But otherwise, we'd also need something to control the size. So we'll get back to that in a bit. Let's go ahead and unsquash our snail. So we just have a snail happening. Let me clear out all of this screen so we can get some space here. There we go. Let's reset the angle to 0. All right. So we know what spacing does. Again, with a capture brush, it's like a stamp. At 100% spacing, there will be no overlap. You can have a slight overlap, like with these snails. I apparently have my snails upside down because I left shape dynamics on. Let me turn that off and come back to brush tip shape. Give it a different color. All right. So there you have it, spacing, exactly as it was before. Okay, that's about everything inside of brush tip shape for a capture brush. This will be different for a bristle brush and a rotable brush and an airbrush. So we'll be coming back here when we start investigating what those are and how they behave. Next up is shape dynamics. So I will see you next video.